It is a great honor and a privilege to introduce Shari Schwartz. We're here in the old city of Jerusalem, the holiest place on earth. And Shari, I'm so privileged to be with you today. It's incredible. You have the most amazing story, your miracle, and how you were one of the very first foreigners to go to Auschwitz.
Yes.
And how you were born in the States and how you eventually came to Israel.
Yes.
So could you tell us a little bit about your life story and your parents and your family?
With pleasure, and I cannot thank you enough for doing this for us. So I was born in Memphis, Tennessee. My mother was born in Memphis, Tennessee, and it's quite a story how she got there. Her father was born in Anapoli, which was a town in Poland. His father was Nifter. He was born in 1895, I believe. His father died before he was born, and his mother died in childbirth. Life was that hard in pre-World War I Poland. It was quite primitive and difficult. Anyway, so he was an orphan his whole life. My grandmother was born in Novograd, it was near Minsk. I'm not exactly sure where, but they were such holy people. That was where the Muslim movement was started, and you can see how I have some pictures in here of them. This top picture is a picture that they took. So when my grandmother was born, when she was a little girl, times were so, they lived in the Pale of Settlement. Times were so hard that they knew that if the horse ate the grass or the cows ate the grass, then you could eat that grass also. It wasn't poisonous. One winter, it was so cold, they had just this one little stove, and my grandmother hadn't felt well, so they let her be closest, and when they woke up in the morning, two of her sisters had frozen to death. A little later, the Tsar took two of her brothers, and they never heard from them again. So that's what life looked like in the late 1800s, early 1900s in Poland. And that's what all of the Jews in the Pale of Settlement, what their life was like. So finally, my grandmother married my grandfather. He came to live with them in Novograd. This was after World War I, and America had closed its doors. Everybody was trying. From 1880 to 1920, something like 3-4 million people from Europe, Jews from Europe, had come to America, and America said, we don't want any more to come in. 1920, they first closed the doors. 1924, they locked the doors. So my grandfather said, we're not going to survive, even before World War II, if we can't get out of here. So you could still come from South America. You could come up into North America. So my grandfather said goodbye to his wife and his 7-year-old little boy, and he went all the way to Argentina, which a lot of Jews did go to Argentina. Many stayed, but he ended up coming up the Mississippi River. He said he stopped in Memphis, and he started a little store. He had to work for 7 years before he could get enough money for my grandmother and her son to come. He was only 2 years old at the time he left, but after the 7 years, he was 9 years old when he finally made it to Memphis. The voyage that they rode on this ship was so horrible across the ocean for my grandmother. They were down with the steerage. It took weeks for the trip. That for the rest of her life, she would never go over a body of water. She wouldn't even go over the Mississippi River Bridge because she was petrified of being in the water. Anyway, so she arrived in Memphis. A couple of years later, my mother was born. And then in 1932, when my mother was 16 months old, this was the Depression, the Jews lived in a part of Memphis called the Pinch. It was called the Pinch. It was where mostly the blacks lived. But the blacks ate well. But the Jews had such pinched cheeks because they were so hungry that they called it the pinch. Anyway, so that's where my mother lived. And in 1931, somebody attacked her father. They were trying to rob him. And my grandmother screamed, and they turned and they shot and killed my mother's father. So that left my grandmother in Memphis with an 11-year-old little boy and a 16-month-old baby girl. And she had to put her son in a foster home. A nice Jewish family took him in. And she rented the corner of a little room, and she had a basket, and she took in sewing. So that's how my mother grew up. When she was 6 years old, she only spoke Yiddish. They didn't have food stamps, they didn't have organizations, they didn't have anything. But so she, by the time, so she, when my mother was 6 years old to go into first grade, they had to put her in a special school for foreigners because she only spoke Yiddish. So that was the life that my mother had growing up. I'll give you a little bit of an aside. When my mother was 80 years old, she has 3 girls, I'm one of 3 girls, we took her back to Memphis on a trip. And we were having a ball. My sister had planned out, we went here, we went there, we went everywhere. We were jumping in and out of the car. My sister had made 80 different places to go visit. And after a while, we noticed that our mother was smiling. But I said, Ma, you don't look so happy. And she said, well, you reminded me of everything I've lived a lifetime trying to forget. And at that point, we decided to go visit Elvis Presley's. And the trip took on a whole, and we went to the Peabody Hotel, which is where my mother had gotten engaged. And it was a whole different trip. But that gives you an idea. When people would have my mother, my grandmother over. So my mother, so they would, it used to be like people that the feet came with the chicken. And when they would serve a meal, they gave my mother the feet. And she said it came to be something that she liked. It was, it was but we just can't fathom what that life was like.
Can I just ask you,
yes.
Shari, you mentioned Elvis Presley.
Yes.
He used to wear a Magen David.
Elvis Presley's mother was Jewish. Whether she was halakhically Jewish or not, I don't know. But she was an incredible Jewish mother. She cooked his dinner for him every single night. He was ecstatic the way he treated it. He gave a huge donation when the Memphis Hebrew Academy opened. His banker, his tailor, his barber, his accountant, he had like 9 or 10 people that were he made them all millionaires. He was very, very good to, and he was also a mensch. He was the fame got to him, but Elvis Presley was a very fine, anyway. So yes, he was very, in fact, when I was growing up, before he became famous, he only lived about 2.5 blocks from me.
Do you remember this?
I remember his house because he had, on his fence, he had black notes,
And did you ever meet him?
No, I did not. But it was like we did because he was ever present. He was very much a part of the Memphis Jewish community.
And he wore a Magen David
yes.
all his time.
And when his mother was nifter, he put a Jewish star on her tombstone. But his handler, I forgot what his name was, the guy who was his promoter, tore it down and put up a different one. He didn't want to focus on the Jewishness. And in his later years, when he moved out to Graceland, he put her in Graceland and he put the Jewish star back on her tombstone.
It's amazing.
Yes. So he was, yes. So that was, my mother grew up in Memphis. Memphis was a very interesting place. It was, at that time, it was the cotton capital of the world. It was the hardwood capital of the world. Everything had to be shipped down the Mississippi River from the Great Lakes all the way out to New Orleans. So there was a large Jewish community that had come there in the 1880s, but they were all very reformed. There was only a tiny, tiny, tiny Orthodox community, in Memphis. But it was a very close one, a very special one. So that was how my mother grew up, and now I guess we can get, so my mother, my father's father was Romanian. He had come over right before World War I. He enlisted in the army in World War I so he could get his citizenship. They sent him out to a base somewhere in the Midwest for him to learn how to ride a horse. He got on the horse, he fell off, the horse kicked him. So from day one, he became a disabled veteran. He never had to go fight. And he was head of the disabled veterans in the state of Tennessee. He took great pride in the fact. But he was a tailor, and they had a dry cleaner's store. So he had these massive machines. It was boiling hot down there. They didn't have air conditioning in Memphis, that's for sure. And the chemicals and everything. And he made his two sons, my father and my father's older brother, from the time they were in like the 7th, 8th, 9th grade, they had to go work in the factory. It ended up tragically, both my father and his brother got some type of lung disease from those things, and they were both nifty young. But that was typical. Immigrants, your kids had to work. So the mayor in Memphis, I can't think of his name right now, he was Jewish, Loeb, Mayor Henry Loeb, L-O-E-D. He converted to Catholicism. He had 10 Catholic children. He was mayor for at least 4 terms, but he wasn't allowed to step foot on the country club golf course because he was a Jew. So
even being the mayor? Even
being the mayor for 4 terms. I ended up buying a property much later in Memphis. It was on an antebellum estate, antebellum meaning before the Civil War. It was a magnificent property, but the original title said no blacks and Jews allowed. So anyway, but that having been said, Memphis was not anti-Semitic. It was the Bible Belt. They were good Christians. They weren't the Catholics. They weren't they were hard workers. They'd be everywhere, like when they would come and knock on your door to try and convert you, and I would open it and say, I'd say, I'm Jewish, I have a mezuzah, and I would point, forgive us, have a good day. When I was in public school growing up, and I wore my Jewish star. When we had the Jewish holidays, there was a tremendous amount of respect for Jews amongst the black population. But the white population, the upper class ones, were a little different. So to me, how did I end up in public school in Memphis? Besides the fact, for example, when my mother used to walk 2 miles with her mother for shul on Shabbos. And my mother thought they walked the 2 miles because they didn't have a nickel for the bus. She thought she didn't know from shul, she thought they had beans for Shabbos because they didn't have money for food. So all of the Yiddishkeit was poverty. There just wasn't that education. Even though, as you'll see from the pictures, my grandmother's parents were Gedolim, and they grew up from century. In fact, I will proudly say, I took because I don't have any relatives, I can jump a little ahead of the game. My grandmother's entire family in World War II, it was in the early part of the war, in beginning of 1942, they were all put in a barn and burned. So my grandmother was the only one that survived. So I always had this special sense that I had to be the one. Somebody once came to my house and I showed him, how I lit a candle or whatever, and I showed him, I said, if you imagine this forest where every leaf is totally burned off, it's only the branches, but on one tree, on one limb, on one leaf, there's one green leaf. I said, that's me, but I have to rebuild the from that.
And from your father's side?
So my father's side was a little better, but it was still very, very hard. You know, they ended up leaving Memphis. They for sure weren't going to stay there. They all went to Silver Spring, Maryland, they kept far more kosher in their house. And
his family, his extended family back in Europe, did they survive?
The truth is, so my father's family, they had come from Iaso, Romania, and it was just him and his brother and his sister, and they got out. But there was no family beyond them, you know. So it was. In fact, my father's mother, their name was Rabinowitz. They changed it to Roberts. There were 9 children. They came to New York. They came through Ellis Island. They lived in Manhattan when it was the help me with the name. What did they call that whole area?
Harlem, maybe?
No, not Harlem. Where all the Jews lived in the old city. In Manhattan.
The Lower East Side?
Yeah, that's good enough. The Lower East Side. Do you know what the leading cause of death was among young Jewish men in the 1920s on the Lower East Side? In the tenement homes, in the tenements? Suicide. Life was so unbearably hard, and Nebuch, one of my they never talked about it, they whatever, but I think one of my father's mother's siblings, but they ended up doing incredible things. So they had, the oldest sister was Retta Shidduch in Memphis, and sight unseen, she came from Brooklyn, from New York, from Manhattan, down to Memphis, a very well-to-do man. His name was Blumenfeld. He owned the only Jewish kosher Hebrew typewriter in the whole state of Tennessee. He was very much a Zionist. He was very much whatever. And he married my grandmother, my grandmother's oldest sister, and she ended up bringing her siblings down. One of the young men she brought down was, one of the guys was a real scholar. He became Nostradamus, and he got incredibly wealthy writing all the books. And even to this day, his descendants get royalties on that. They were a very, very talented family. But anyway, so my grandmother brought, my grandmother's oldest sister, she brought other family members down. Another one went to the first law school in Memphis that had opened for Jewish kids because they couldn't get into the regular law school. And he played a huge role for the state of Tennessee, honoring Andrew Jackson. It's just, yes, Memphis became a wonderful home. A lot of Jews came and were down there. But anyway, so back to me.
You just have a few pictures of your family.
Well, so I will, let me come back to this in a moment. Let me not jump ahead. So let me go back to my mother when she was still a child. So in 1945, the war was over. Then in something like 47, 48, my grandmother got a call from Russia. And, it was long distance, operated the whole thing. And she didn't know what to do. And she hung up, and there was this one very nice accountant who was helping her. People were helping her all along. And, it's during the McCarthy years. What years were McCarthy? The 1950s?
In the early 50s.
In the early 50s. It was during the McCarthy years. He said, you got a call from Russia? And you're Jewish? And she wrote down the phone number to return the call. He said, tear it in little pieces, burn it, and do the ashes down the toilet. And my grandmother did. And we often wondered if one of her brothers had survived and might be living in Eretz Yisrael. We never, I would love, I tried through Yad Vashem at one point to see if I could trace, but I did take that test where, for your genealogy, and it came back 100% East European Jewish. And that all those centuries, my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, all the way back to Har Sinai, that it was, so that was also, even though I haven't been able to track any relatives, at least I have that, that they were part of that group. So anyway, so my mother went to school, and when she was in the 11th grade, she met my father, who was in the 12th grade, even though he had to go work with his father. The school, there were only 2 high schools in all of Memphis. That's where the Jews all went. Anyway, and a week after she graduated 12th grade. My father had 1 year of college, but his father made him come back and work in the clothing factory instead. They got married. So that was, they got married. And then I was born not a whole lot later. And when I was 3 years old, we were living in Memphis. My father was still having to work for his father, unfortunately, but anyway, that didn't last much longer. But so when I was 3 years old, they came out with a new drug on the market. It was before the FDA, and it used to be strep throat. Everybody got strep throat. It was really a serious disease. You could die from it, you could get heart problems. So when the first streptomycin came on the market, all the children who took it, it was too strong. It caused a nerve deafness. Now, Helen Keller had lost her hearing when she was 18 months old, and she could never speak. So she was deaf and couldn't speak. But since I was already 3 years old, I could speak, but I couldn't hear. I was profoundly deaf in one ear, severely deaf in the other. The one that, my right ear, you could literally shoot a gun and I wouldn't hear it. But the left ear, I could just hear enough, maybe. But the truth is, down south, everybody spoke slowly. They enunciated clearly. From their faces, everybody just was very expressive. And it's really, really mamish and nice, but I could function. So in school growing up, I always sat on the front row, and if I had a question, the teacher would come over, somebody else would come over, and I lived my life on swings. There's something about the inner ear at a swing, and for years I had a rocking chair in every room of my house. But for my entire public school, I went to public school my whole life, I couldn't interact. I couldn't play their games. I couldn't do sports. I really couldn't do anything that they did. So I spent my life in books. I read dictionaries, I read encyclopedia, the World Book, first the whole World Book, then the Encyclopedia Britannica. When Art Scroll came out, I read every single book that Art Scroll published for 20 years. So that was when they opened the Memphis Hebrew Academy in Memphis. They, of course, wanted me to come, and my parents would have loved for me to have gone. We were always, my mother schlepped me 3 times a week for 5 years to Baron Hirsch for after-school programs and Sundays for kids who weren't enrolled at the academy. But they were afraid with my language that it would be, I couldn't handle the Hebrew, I couldn't handle. So, in fact, I went to the rabbi in the town many years later said it's such a shame that I didn't go to the Memphis Hebrew Academy instead. It would have been so much easier for me now. And he said, never question the way you came. He said, Olivai, but everybody out of the academy had come out like you've turned out. So that made me feel a little better. But I was determined that my children would get the education that I didn't, which was why in 1989 we made Aliyah from Memphis to Brooklyn, which was huge. But anyway, that's all I know.
When you were growing up, did you have friends? Did you manage to make friends?
Well, so I did have friends, mainly because I was like the smartest kid in the class. Everybody said, oh yeah, the Jew. Because I studied so much. It wasn't that I was that much smarter. But also, I was a concert pianist. So they had a band. So I played like 5 of the instruments in the band because I was the only one who knew how to read music. And I placed at the state level in the Latin tournament. We had to take 4 years of Latin. I placed in the math thing statewide. I won the spelling bee, I failed a spelling bee. It was funny. The word they asked me was bacon. I didn't know how to spell bacon. I could spell anti-disestablishment terrorism, but I couldn't spell pig. Anyway, but so I was always respected. I did that. I did the newsletter that went out once a week. Or I did everybody else is having it, and for me, that was I went to summer school. What else was I going to do? But so it served me well. But anyway, so where was I stopping?
So at school with your friends?
Yes, I was friends. I was head of the drama club. I was head of, yes, I did. I could talk, you know. No, I did a lot. So
and did you ever have anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish feelings?
I will tell you, the worst, my one biggest problem, but no. In fact, my father had opened a little grocery store down in the black part of Memphis, and I would go down there and he finally quit because he closed it up because he ended up giving so much of it away. But I would have a ball playing with the black kids. To this day, when I was in Brooklyn and I would ride a subway and I would feel like nervous and I couldn't get over. I'm uneducated. And here I am looking at people and listening to them talk, and I couldn't discern what continent they were even from. All the different nationalities. Because in Memphis, 49.9 black, 49.9 white. You know, there weren't all these others. But anyway, so when I would ride the subway when I got to New York, I would always pick a black guy because I knew he would take care of me. I always felt very, very good because there was a respect. They tipped their hat there, and I give back. When I was in Lakewood, and they were first opening Hamed, and they had hired me to help them getting their federal licensing and everything they needed. So they hired me, and they had a problem in the community. None of the blacks wanted to be a part of Hamed or whatever. They were trying to fight it. And I said, can I have your attention a minute? I had maybe about 8 or 9 gentlemen there. I said, I have to tell you, I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, and I'm going to tell you something that happened. And people were upset, like, why aren't they cooperating? We're doing something nice to them. I said, they don't trust you, and I'm going to tell you why. So when I had my first child, they had something in Memphis where they put everybody who was pregnant in a room, and they gave everybody scopolamine. That was a drug where you didn't feel any pain, but you thrived around. And some people have been in that room 2 days, you know, and I was part of a group that we didn't want that. We had to go to court to get permission to be awake during delivery. So when I was awake during delivery, they stick me in a little thing practically out in the hallway. But I saw a black woman and her husband coming up in a wheelchair, and she was close to delivery, and she was screaming, just take me in, take me in. And the nurse said to the husband, how many children do you have? He said 2. She said, then sign this paper. And his wife says, I'll sign it. And the husband says, no, you can't sign it. And she said, I'm signing it. And she did. In Memphis at that time, see what year we're talking about, 1971, 72, 1972, 73. Said, what are you talking about? And it turns out that if you already had 2 children, you came in for your 3rd, they tied your tubes so you could never have more children. And I witnessed that with my own eyes. And I said that to those black preachers and everybody who was at that meeting, everybody. I said, that's why they don't trust you. And from that time on, I had those guys in my hand. They knew, because I have a comfort zone with that black population. Plus, I taught at the University of Memphis. And by then, Federal Express had opened, and FedEx wanted to pay for these guys to get an education. And so I taught in the afternoon so that I could take. So I'm comfortable with every nationality. It's just a whole, anyway, where did
Can I ask, tying
Yes.
of the tubes, was that only for the black population, or was it for the whites as well?
Which part?
Where if you had more than 2 children, they would tie the
Oh,
tube.
it's only the blacks. I mean,
Only
only,
the
of course. And if had I not seen it, I would not have.
Believe it.
Yeah, I would not. So I had that sensitivity, even though I grew up in Memphis when it was segregated. And it was, not only was it an all-white school, the name of my school was White Station, White Station High School. And during cotton picking season, they used to close the black schools so they could go out and pick cottons in the fields. But they lived good lives. They loved coming to work for the Jews. The blacks who went up north and were worked in the factories had life a million times harder. Every Jewish person paid for all the medical care. There was real love and respect and mutual. If my mother had somebody come clean the house, and if I said something back to her, my mother would slap me if I wasn't respectful to the cleaning lady. So it's a whole different type. Now it's a whole. But back then, anyway.
Shari, can you show some of the incredible pictures that you had?
Yes. So this was, my mother was Nifter, and when she was 90, and I put together this little book for her, and she was a lovely, lovely woman. I can tell you a little side story about her. She ended up in later years moving up north to live with my younger sister Sheila, and my sister Sheila worked at Tiffany's for Donald Trump when he built the Trump casino there. And she said, Ma, there's a little jewelry store around the corner, fake jewelry. You go work for them and I'll drive you, we'll have a ball. And my mother said, great. Well, it turned out, she couldn't believe it. People would buy hundreds, thousands of dollars of fake jewelry. So it turned out Tiffany's was opening a new store in Center City, Philadelphia. And my sister preferred to go work there. It was a much better thing. Well, you have to understand, 1,000 people would apply for a job like that. People who had Rolodexes, they had millions of millionaire customers, whatever. And my sister, whose married name was different than my mother's name, said, go try out. What do you have to lose? Well, it turned out my mother, that her school had put her up for the Miss Memphis contest. She was beautiful, she was soft, she was mannered. She'd never really worked her whole life. She was 60 years old. And they realized that there's a certain, so Memphis was next to Louisiana, and Louisiana was French. So the manners, the food, cream, butter, those are my favorite ingredients. It wasn't like Georgia, Alabama. It wasn't that kind of, even the cuisine. So my mother was a gentle lady, and it's so funny. She lied. She said she went to college. She lied. My sister filled out the form for her. My mother didn't lie. My sister did. But right away, the guy realized the whole store was all of these brash New Yorkers. But maybe they did need a little bit because parts of Philadelphia were old aristocracy, old American aristocracy. Either way, so I happened to have had a form from an employment agency, a test that you take. I said, Ma, just in case, let me go with it was 50 questions, 2 times 2, we went through the thing. Well, darn, if the next day when she went in, they didn't give her that exact same test. She aced it. And they hired her in Tiffany's. It ended up, she won their Employee International. She would tell people, thank you. My sister had to show her how to tie the knot, But she worked for 10 years at Tiffany's, and it was just a delight for her. But so, and even coming from our roots, can you imagine? But all right, so that was my mother. So going back, so here's a picture of my grandparents in Novogrudok. My grandfather was a huge Guttle bear, a big, you can see they lived very, very, very simply, to put it mildly. But they got all dressed up for that picture to come. Just a few years later, this picture on the bottom, the shadel is all pitiful. She doesn't have her earrings anymore. Her cheeks are sunken. She would replace, she only had one dress. She would replace the part of the dress, and you could see even that was stained. She no longer had the watch, just the chain. He had had a stroke, and this hand was in in his pocket. He had reddish hair. This was a double-breasted coat. This is a single one. They sent a postcard to my grandmother back in America, but they knew when they left they would never see each other again.
It's amazing the difference in the picture.
And this, you don't even realize how hard it was. Yes, they lived, they were barely, my grandmother didn't find out until the war was over, but they and the rest of their family that was with them were put in a barn and burned. You know that gentleman's name, the Bilski brothers. They were from Novogratz. And it so happened he's over 100 years old, and I met him in a shul down in Palm Beach in a wheelchair just about 6 months or 8 months ago. He was just recently nifted, but he was one of the Bilski brothers, and he remembered, you know. Anyway, so my grandmother did not remarry until after my mother married, all of those years. And it so happened there was a man from their town who his brothers had gone to Canada. It was much easier to get into Canada than it was America, and they were furriers. And my grandmother, there was a niece that somebody wanted to read the shidduch that she could marry her. So my grandmother had to escort her. When my grandmother got with that lady up there, he wanted my grandmother, not the other one. Caused a little family friction, but we won't go there. But so he was the only grandfather that I knew. He had been at Auschwitz for 6 years, had a massive dent in his skull where they had hit him on the head with a gun. It's amazing that he survived, but they were so strong. They were.
And what was his name?
Reuben Lazar, Lazar. And I would love to be able to find his brothers. We're going back so many years. They had brothers who were...
Did he ever speak about his experiences in Auschwitz?
He said he would never go back. And he said and he was happy to have come down to Memphis. He said because if he ever saw a German, he would kill him with his bare hands. No, so he never, ever spoke about it. And finally, my grandmother had a husband. And they would go spend their winters in Florida and Miami. So here's a picture of my grandmother when she was a little girl. She was I have a picture of the whole family, all the ones who died. That I have one picture. It's in storage in Brooklyn. That was. Finally, the accountant helped my grandmother get a job. She bought this little house. They rented out 3 rooms, and she had 1. You know, and that's the way she ended up providing for herself. The night they got engaged, my mother and father. And this is my mother when she was, I believe, 90 years old. Never had a facelift, never whatever.
That's amazing.
She was a lovely, lovely, lovely lady. So, and here are pictures of their tombstones. So, Sam Hammer, I spent hours and hours in that place in Manhattan where they kept all the things from all the vessels that came in. So I actually found him on a ship's registry. He spelled his name H-A-M, with only one M. His name was Shmuel Eliyahu Ben Yecheskel, Bar Yecheskel, Bar Rav Yecheskel. Bedavkid had the thing. He was born in 1895, and he was killed in 1932. He was 37 years old, and that man had the most miserable life for almost his entire life. So now my grandmother's parents were Avram Hersh, again Ben Rav Bitzalel Halevi, and this was her mother, Stisha. Samek Tez Yud Shen Ayin. And would you believe when it came, I named my daughter Stisha after her, and when it came time for my daughter's chuppah, the Rav said, you can't spell the name like this, that's not a kosher name. And he wouldn't let us put the Shin Ayin. Even though when we came to New York, the biggest guy, I don't remember his name, who was the Bucky on all of these kind of things, he said, absolutely, that's the name. Either way, we won't go there. But, and the grandfather, who was the one on the horse, who served in the army, and that's how we got his benefits, and his name was Menachem Mendel. Another fluky story for his Levaya. He was nifted pretty young. I think he was like 64 years old. So when I went to the cemetery, my grandmother was there, and one of his sisters came, and his sister was standing there, and she said, it's a shame what happened to his wife and his first baby. And my grandmother said, what? He said, yeah, he was married and his wife died in childbirth. He never told my grandmother. Like, why did she have to know now? But that's how life was. Life was hard. You know, it was just a whole different kind of, does that give you a good start?
It's amazing. So Shari, after school, did you decide to go to college? Or your higher education?
That's a story. So they had programs like Softy, NCSY, where kids from all over the Mid-South would come to Memphis. So there was this girl from Little Rock, Arkansas, can't think of her name right now, that I had become friends with, and she was going off to college, and I was a week away from going into 12th grade. And her parents were driving from Little Rock, Arkansas, all the way to Knoxville, which is 400 miles at the other end of the state. They said, you want to come? I said, sure. So I went with them, and I had never seen a college campus. And I had never seen thousands of, I said, whoa. So while she's busy moving in, I sort of meandered over to the admissions department. I said, is there any way I could sort of just skip 12th grade and go to school? And the guy looked at me. He said, you want to take a test? I said, yeah. So he gave me one of those tests to take. And apparently I did not bad. He said, you want to call your parents? And Mama, she called my mother. He called my mother. He said, we'll accept your daughter if you'll let her come. And they just, on the other end of the phone, so the family took me all the way back to Memphis. My parents packed me up, and my father drove me the next day. I was 16 years old. I didn't even have my 17th birthday yet. And I started at the University of Tennessee. And that started my collegiate career. I got a bachelor's in philosophy because I had done so much reading, just so much in-depth reading. One summer I read all of what are some famous Russian writers?
Tolstoy.
And
Solzhenitsyn.
No. With a K.
Gorky. There's Gorky.
No, I am losing my memory. See how smart I am? But I would take a summer and I would read all of all the great writers. They used to have a great writers series book. So I had the depth in reading. So I wanted it, and it was real philosophy. We read all of, everything from Plato and Aristotle all the way to Kant and Kierkegaard and Sartre, so that was a real, anyway. So I was but to start in the philosophy department, they required you to take a logic course. If A equals C and B equals C, then A equals B. Well, I fell in love with the logic course in the mathematics department. So I was cutting the rest of my classes to take, so I started out in the math department. I was originally going to be, a mathematician, which is what my father wanted me to be, was a mathematician. He taught me how to use a slide ruler and the whole. Anyway, so I ended up getting a degree in philosophy. But Memphis, the University of Tennessee had a program that if you went 3 years undergraduate and then 3 years law school, you got your law degree and your college degree. So So I said, that's great. So I took 18 periods every year, and there we were. I'm all ready to enroll. I completed my junior year. I had all the credits I could possibly need, and I go to register at law school, and they look, and they see, here it is, I'm at the end of all, they see I'm still only 18 years old. They said, we don't allow women in the law school until they're 21 years old, because it wasn't safe for, I said, you're kidding me. You were kidding me. So I lost a whole semester, and since my parents had moved to Cherry Hill, New Jersey, near my sister, and she was, so I ended up finishing up losing a semester, but then I went to Temple University, and that's when I got my first so I didn't graduate high school. I didn't have that diploma because I left. I didn't graduate my first year of college. Anyway, so I had a teacher there, Mrs. Beardsley, and she got me accepted into Yale Law School. And Hillary Clinton was like 2 years ahead of me or whatever, but since I was a semester off, I had to wait, so I went back to Memphis. And that's where I met my husband, and that's where I ended up staying in Memphis. So what else am I going to do? I went to the University of Memphis, and I got a master's in political science. So fortunately, they liked me enough, they hired me as a political science professor. And then I also got a bachelor's in public administration that you just come out with. So an MBA is a master's in business administration. MPA was a master's in public for government agencies. So I got my degree in that. I got my degrees. That's all I knew how to do was go to school.
And with all your readings, did you read a lot about the Holocaust and Jewish history?
Oh, of course. Of course, but not so much was written that early, until Art Scroll came out, until, Feldheim's. It was sort of a topic but I will tell you this, living in Brooklyn, my top 30 friends all had their Holocaust survivor parents live with them until they died. Not a single one put in a nursing home, not a single. I had one friend across the street, she was an only child. She spent her entire life for her parent. She couldn't go away. She couldn't, for every Shabbos, every Yontif, some of them had really very sad stories because their parents had been damaged, but they understood. They had such respect and such. I have this one friend. There were only 2 girls in the family. Her father was Nifter, but the grandfather was still alive. The mother remarried, so there was nobody to take care of the grandfather. She couldn't bring him with her new husband. So these 2 girls lived in Brooklyn. One had 11 children, I think the other had like 14. But this happened when they were younger. And the gentleman told them, he said he was going to live 2 weeks with one and 2 weeks with the other. He carried a suitcase, but he insisted that his bed be put right next to the dining room. He said, they had these row houses, and he said, I don't want them to be able to walk past me to get to the kitchen. I want to be able to, and this gentleman, they even when they went to Camp Morris, he lived to be, I believe, 101, 103. The last few years of his life, he did have to be put somewhere, but they still all took care of him. But they felt bad that there's nobody who's going to be able to sit shiva for him. He was Nifter on Tisha B'Av, and the whole world. It was just the stories. But so I can give you 1 million Holocaust survivor stories because every single one of my friends, and they were all very, very extraordinary.
So, Shari, can I ask, how did you manage to go to Auschwitz? Because you were the pioneer. You were one of the very first.
So there, my sister in New Jersey had a very, very wealthy friend. He was a doctor. His mother had been at Auschwitz as a young girl, and she said, I have to go back to find my brother, my sister. She said, these people were tormented by memories for their entire lives. I had one good friend. They had taken 2 children out of her arms in the line at Auschwitz and brutally murdered each one in front of her. So this friend of mine, she had 2 brothers. She was the only girl. She said her entire life her mother screamed all night long. That's who she grew up with. When this friend got older, her mother totally lost her memory and had to be totally institutionalized. But she didn't even remember, couldn't recognize her daughter. But this friend made a point that every single day she went and fed her mother by hand every bite she put in her mouth. But then my friend, she had a problem with pregnancies, or she had to be bedridden, so she even got all of her friends to go feed her mother. And I said to her, I said, it's so sad that your mother is like this. She said, it was such a gift from the Eibishter. She said, if my mother had to live another 14 years, better she lost her memory. Why should she live another 14 years screaming her whole life? I can tell you, every one of these 30 people have I have another friend, it was just her and her brother. Her parents somehow came to Brooklyn, and they needed to go to work. And this little girl was like, I think 3 years old, and they put her in a play school thing, and all she did was cry the whole time. So the group told her, they said, we can't take your child. But they said, but you have to, we have to go to work. So the little girl came home that day, and the father, one of these rinky, old, dinky Brooklyn homes, and there were steps that led down to the basement, and no lights. They put her on the top step, and she's screaming. He closed the door. He said, I will not open this door until you stop screaming. This is a 3-year-old little girl. The whole day, she just screamed and screamed. Finally, they opened the door and let her in. To this day, that woman has never cried. But she adored her parents. She understood. They all have horror stories, but they also loved and respected their parents. But they had very, very hard lives with Holocaust. But they devoted their lives to their parents. And this is what I had as all my neighbors in Brooklyn, and it was an extraordinary awakening for me. Anyway, okay, so where did we?
So how did you manage to decide to go to Auschwitz?
Oh no, so this woman who desperately wanted to go back, and apparently her son not only had the money but the connections. He got, I think there were 12 of us that took a flight. We were the first ones to step foot on Polish soil since the end of World War II, because it was still the Berlin Wall. It was still communist controlled. The plane that we took from, I forgot where we landed, maybe Switzerland or somewhere, to take the Polish plane, there was an armed guard at the front of the plane, an armed guard at the back of the plane. It was, and they announced on the thing, all smokers on the right-hand side of the plane. We cracked up. Like, that works? Then they said, we have one missing baggage. They pulled out all the baggage out of the bottom part of the train, spread it all out on say, please look out the window and see which one is missing. We said, oh my gosh, these Poles, we never heard of such. So the whole trip was, we cracked up. So when we landed in Poland.
And what year was this, roughly?
1984. In 1984. It was, what was the name of the man who ended up being such a good, and he's the one who let down the Berlin Wall. He was the one who met with Reagan, when he said take this wall down with a K. I can't think of his name. It'll come to, but he was a good man. It ended up, he had, I think...
Gorbachev.
Yeah, Gorbachev. It was Gorbachev. Yes, right. Thank you. But anyway, so we could not get over how primitive, that everything was cold and stone. Everybody walked around looking down. When we were taking some of the back roads to get to places, I saw women pulling plows on their back for their little plot of land. They lived like people in the 1800s. Communist rule was awful, and everybody was afraid. And anyway, so when we had to go through to get checked in, I wore contact lenses at the time, and they opened my contact lens case, and they confiscated it because they said there could be microfilms in there or something. I said, okay, that's that. And then there wasn't like kosher food. I had a thing of peanut butter. They opened the peanut butter and took their finger all through to make sure there wasn't anything hidden in my peanut butter. But the guy felt bad, and he brought me an apple from Chernobyl. He said, listen, I don't think it'll cause you any, because they had that. But when we arrived, when our bus took us to Auschwitz, forget just what the Polish countryside looked like. Forget what all of Poland looked like. It was that the big sign said, 6 million Poles were murdered here by the Germans. No
mention of Jews.
No mention of Jews. This one gentleman wore a tallis the whole way, and boy, did he get some looks. But the tour guide that we had, he was very nice. He said, I am telling you, he said, pretend you're a camcorder. They didn't have movie cameras, but they said, pretend you're a camcorder, a camera recorder, and take in everything you see. He said, do not emote, do not think, do not get emotionally involved, just let your eyes look. He said, you'll be able to remember it later. He said, but if you start to get involved at any one thing, he said, you'll lose out on the rest of the trip. And that's what we did. And we actually walked, like for example, into that chamber where they closed the door, and you saw the walls. You saw, it was not cleaned up. We saw the ovens with, it wasn't set up fancy and clean. There's one place where they dumped the ashes into a pool of water, some kind of thing there. Well, when you're dumping 6 million ashes, the ashes were floated with the bone fragment. The bottom of this entire lake was white. We said, oh, that's so pretty, what's that white? So that's the bones that didn't touch. So right then and there, and that poor lady, she said, yes, I want to go to there. She said, no, your unit was, no, I'm telling you, my bungalow where I slept, I want to go there. And they tried to tell her, no, this is where you must have been. So she was disconcerted the whole way. Finally we got to that lake. They had brought yard-side candles. She said, I realize I'm not going to find my parents. She said, we'll light here. It was just, so after Auschwitz, we were at the hotel in Warsaw, and this was in October, and everything was just stone, cold, there were no trees, it was just very, so they said, when you leave your hotel, which by the way still had the guard all night outside of our hotel room with the guns, they said, when you leave the hotel, meet me in the plaza. So we all bundle up, we go to the plaza, we're waiting for the bus to come to take us to, I forgot where we were going on that trip, the Ramaz Shul. Anyway, so I'm waiting for the bus, and it's 5, 10, 15 minutes late. The bus is late, and we're uncomfortable, it's cold. And then he's like 30 minutes late. 40 minutes late, what's going on here? We're going back to the hotel, we can't take this. He drove up, and he said, I'm sorry I'm late. He said it wasn't on purpose. He said, but I have to tell you something. This is the plaza where they made every single Jewish resident of Warsaw come out and wait in this plaza until they would be taken away. He said it was very close to that date, men, women, children, they stood there for 3 days. No food, no water, no warmth, and something like 80% of them died on that plaza. Said, I just want you to know where you're standing. Well, it's hard to describe what it feels like to have those kind of experiences, and we had them all day. So we went to the Ramah Shul.
In Krakow?
In Krakow. And we got there kind of late. So it was like, but when they opened the door to the shul, it's the first time it had been open since the end of the war. It had been bombed, it had been wrecked. There were all this form and pages were all mushed and moldy and filthy, and all you could do was like peek in and step over. You just, this is the Ramah Shul, you know it. So you know me, I'm tied to books. So I'm just there looking at volume. Everything was just destroyed and ruined. And out of this whole Ramah Shul, there was one Mishnah Torah, one Sefer that was whole. It was moldy, and we were there Erev what?
Could be Erev Sukkot, maybe.
I think it was Erev Sukkot. And whatever it was, so this thing, this volume, was from the 1600s. It is so different from now because it was different Meforshim, different, you know, the commentary, different everything. And the pages were like this, where things had been folded down, and it was folded down to Hilchos Sukkos. But the other thing was, when you opened it on the front cover, there was a bush. A drawing of a bush, and it had obvious where leaves were missing. That was a code to say which part has been deleted because of the Gentile who took out.
The censor.
They censored it. Yes, that's right. So so it was cold and it was rainy, it was wet, and I had a coat, and the guide said, "Take that book back to your people." Now you don't understand. I could have gotten my entire flight in such big trouble. They were all out at the cemeteries at the Ramah Shul. I didn't. I kept that thing. I kept it in my coat. I got back on the bus. I put it in my suitcase. I covered it with everything. I didn't even tell my sister. And Baruch Hashem, I was able to get it out, and my son has it. You know, it's great.
That is incredible.
Incredible.
Shari, can I ask, when you were in Auschwitz,
yes,
were there any other people visiting at that time?
So what they had was a few school children, not visited, but they made a point. They made a point to bring Polish school children, and maybe it was just that area, it might not have been all of Poland, to show what the Germans did to them. What the Germans did to the Polish people.
And no mention of Jews at all?
Correct.
Was there any Magen Davids or signs of...
It was, they showed exhibits like with the shoes, they showed suitcases, they showed, but it wasn't conspicuously Jews. They, you know, it was...
And your tour guide, he was Polish?
Yes.
Did he mention that it was...
I mean, you could see, you know, but you saw the big signs. I mean, he translated for us. The signs were in Polish, you know.
And did he say it's a travesty of justice that they don't mention that it was Jews?
Oh, no. They obviously, it was a man and another lady, they obviously had sensitivities. They might even have had some type of Jewish connection. But like he said, you can, so when we left Poland, our plane came to Eretz Yisrael.
I just have to ask you, before you left, where else did you go in Poland? Did you go to Majdanek or Lublin?
I wish I could remember. We did go several. So there was one place. Who was it? Landers. There are two big Gedolim Jewish men who did incredible things in Europe. Who's the lady with the makeup? What was her name?
That's Lauder.
He had set up a couple of places for old, broken seniors to be able to get food, something. He played a role. There was somebody else that there were two organizations that had something. But
And in Warsaw, did you go to the synagogue? It's the original synagogue in Warsaw?
we must have. We were there for 5 days, 4 or 5 days.
So can I ask,
You have to understand.
This is incredible that yours was the very first
Yes.
foreign tour
Yes.
that was taken. How did you manage, or your sister, how did you manage to get onto this tour?
It was somebody at their shul, this one doctor who apparently had enough money and enough pull, where he pulled it off.
And were there any press, were there any articles written about it?
No.
Because this
No.
was an amazing event.
Yes.
You were the pioneers.
Yeah, somewhere I saved a lot of notes, but I've moved so much in the interim. I don't even. I took some of the money that they had, but it was. I spoke a lot after I came back different places.
So
For example, at the University of Memphis, somebody wanted to open a Jewish studies program. He had lost family in the Holocaust. So until they could get it put together, I was the first chair. So it's interesting. I had about 20 people sign up, and not one was Jewish. But they were such respectful, interested. They wanted to know about Judaism. It's been an incredible journey. I've just had the most.
So I have to mention, your group that went there,
Yes.
this could have been one of the very first Jews that came into Auschwitz,
They were.
because no one was visiting Auschwitz at
You
that
weren't
time.
allowed even to cross the border. This guy must have had some type of pull with somebody somewhere, obviously. But yeah.
And this is the first time you got a passport.
Yes, correct. Correct.
Was this the first time that you had left the States?
Correct. Right. I think maybe one time when I was up north, they took a camp thing to Canada. I went to a chassan in Canada. But you didn't need a passport to get, and Canada didn't count, which is for...
And were you very nervous to go to Auschwitz because what you had heard and read?
From my grandmother, I felt an obligation to go. I bedafka felt.
And the group, was it a very religious group?
So I get very uncomfortable with that term. Let me explain. Let me explain. I know what so many people went through and lost, and you can't blame them. So I like to use the word observant. They're all religious. They do what they know, or if they rebel, there's a reason. Or if there's a, do they know enough halacha to be observant? Probably not. But if you didn't live in Brooklyn, if you didn't live in, certain places, it was very, very, very difficult to find that.
How many were on your group?
I think there were 12.
So
Small group.
You couldn't make a minyan to say Kaddish?
Oh no, they didn't need a minyan to make Kaddish. They made Kaddish when they, but I was the only observant one, which is why I'd set my own food.
Did you meet any other Jews when you were in Poland?
No.
You didn't meet any of the locals?
If they were hiding it. Oh, except when we went to that place with those old men at that, one of those louder, food things. But very, very, nobody looked up. Even then. So you can imagine what it must have been like.
It was under the communists.
Under Khrushchev,
Sure. Poland was part of the Eastern Bloc.
Yeah.
Wow. And when you came back, you spoke about it? People must have...
Oh, yeah, everywhere that I could. In fact, when I went back to the University of Memphis, the Reform Synagogue, which was huge and very powerful, very good. They walked with the blacks during the civil rights. They were really... You got to remember, I lived in Memphis when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and they sent tanks down the street. Memphis has a history. But either way, so what was I saying? Take me back.
So when you came back, you spoke to quite a few groups.
Right. What was I going to say?
And then you spoke in the Reform Shul.
Oh, no, I was teaching, and I noticed when I walked into the university library, there was a display, a Judaica display, and I'm looking, and I see a Torah scroll that was partially burned there. And they wanted to make a point, that I said, this can't stay there. So I sort of took it upon myself to tell the librarian. She knew I was a professor there. I said, listen, would you mind giving me that Torah scroll? It's not supposed to be here. And she rolled it up and gave it to me. And I called the leading rabbi at the Reform Shul. Said, you'll have to forgive me, but I picked up you what? That didn't go over real well, but they didn't put it back.
And where's that Torah scroll today?
They either needed to bury it or do something, but you couldn't display it. Well, I guess I was a little bit of a radical. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. But, I asked Meragay first, should I? He said, if you can. And I did. Anyway.
And Shari, I have to ask you, you have also the distinction that you had a close connection with David Kranzler.
Oh. So we in Brooklyn, I'd never heard of a one-way street before. I didn't drive into Borough Park for 6-7 years. So when we landed there, the kid said, Ma, can we cross the street? I said, sure. As soon as you don't see a car, and then you just cross the street. Well, they came back about 20 minutes. Ma, that's not going to happen. There's never a time when there's not a car. So anyway, we hadn't been there long, and you had to go all around one-way streets. So my husband was driving, and one of my daughters was in the car. They come around the turn, and they're coming. Well, it so happened they have a lot of V's in Brooklyn. So there was a car of a yeshiva guy from Canada, I believe, and he's looking to try and find where he is. And he crashed into, and so they called Hatzalah. My daughter was really okay, but anyway, it was traumatic, it was whatever. So the guy was coming to look for a date with the Kranzler's daughter. So they came running out also. Oh, we're so sorry. Anyway, they ended up meeting us. And the daughter that got hit, we had only been in Brooklyn for a year, or not even that, might have been in her first year. And their daughter, who was waiting for the date, Shani, said, I'll tutor her every day. Every day she came for a year and helped my daughter with whatever she needed, to catch up in school. It was a wonderful relationship. So Dr. Kranzler had us over also. They felt terrible. By the way, she went out with him a second time just to make him feel better, but that wasn't a shoulda. But when he found out my credentials, he said, oh, can you help me? Because he needed somebody he had so much stuff, he needed editing. Because he would say the same thing 4 times, and he didn't have time to go back and do. Well, when I started reading his stuff, and I had just been to Auschwitz a few years earlier. It was just really min hashemayim, that whole accident, that whole everything only. And to this day, we are very. In fact, his wife, Judy Kranzler, taught at Prospect, and she had my granddaughters in her class. Yeah.
And what is your impressions of David Kranzler? I mean, he's a giant. He was he was a pioneer. He actually.
So his older brother, Gershon Kranzler, was a gadol. He was also the principal of the Beis Yaakov in Williamsburg or whatever. And Judy, I have to start with Judy first, forget David. Judy's father was the one who financed that train from the, what's his name?
With Sugihara with?
No. What was his name with the K? The Kushner train.
The Kastner train.
The Kastner train. Judy Kranzler's father financed that entire Kastner train for the entire community. They lost every penny. It was only supposed to take something like 800. It ended up taking 1,600. And Judy was like a 2.5, 3-year-old on that train with her parents when that cast her train, and they had to they sat it out for a few months in what was the good concentration camp, the better
So
one?
they went to Bergen-Belsen.
No, maybe.
No, it was
Okay,
Bergen-Belsen.
but either
They
until
were supposed to go to Switzerland.
Right.
Some thought they were coming to Eretz Yisrael.
Right.
But
So
it landed up in Bergen-Belsen.
the bottom line is they made it out of, they made it out in time.
So Judy was from Hungary.
Judy was from Hungary, yes, and her father was the gadol of the town. He lost and you would think when they get, her word, you would think when they came back and started getting lives in Borough Park, they might have helped her father out or paid him back. He never recovered a penny.
Do you know her maiden name?
I did. I can find out. But anyway, so that's...
So Judy was
by the
on
way,
the train.
and there was somebody, an older girl, who took care of her and held a doll with her. She really doesn't remember the voyage. She was that young. But her mother, Judy's mother, Judy Kranzler's mother was, and she's got a sister. I became very close to the whole family, but extraordinary people. Judy lives in Eretz Yisrael. She comes to Eretz Yisrael. Her daughter lives in Eretz Yisrael. So I'm not sure what town it is. I can find out. You can meet with them whenever you would like.
Can I ask, did David Kranzler, did he write about the Kastner train?
Of course. Of course. So David Kranzler, why do I want, they were Polish, but for some reason they were in Germany or educated in Germany or did something in Germany. Or somehow when they came to America, his brother Gershom was in a really high position in this Beis Yaakov. So David had to go deliver something to him, and he saw Judy. And he went and asked his brother, I think she was like in the 11th grade, maybe 10th, 11th. He said, can I go out with her? He said, no, not until she graduates. He said, then can I write to her? He said, yes. Every single day they wrote letters. And he's a writer. And they had an incredible relationship. But also, Gershom was in the heart of those who helped during the Holocaust. Anyway, David ended up getting his a doctorate in library science, and so he was of tremendous help with all this documentation that had been going on. But they also were they interviewed all the key players, everything with Mike Tress, everything with Rabbi Mendelowitz, have you pronounced it? He was the one who, his brother played a key role with all of these people. David had this wealth of information. Not only that, but he knew how to scholarly handle it. He had all the original documents from I'll have to prepare a little more. You're going off the top of my head. He was the gadol. So much so. So when we landed in Israel, after we came to the hotel, we went to Yad Hashem, and we were livid because Yad Hashem had a whole secular perspective, like Israel. We couldn't believe how they whitewashed so much of what went on with the Orthodox. The Orthodox did not exist as far as Yad Hashem was in its early years. Now it's a totally different story. But they had international competitions where David would submit his papers and Yad Hashem wouldn't even accept them. They wouldn't even let him enter. There was a lead man there who everybody thinks was this whatever. He was terrible.
David's, I think his master's, his doctorate was on the Mir Yeshiva and the escape.
That's what he did for his thesis. His thesis was on the Japanese, the Nazis, and the Jews. For a thesis, all you need to do is like this. He did a book like this.
I had that.
He documented, and you have to remember, this is before. It's before
the internet.
Computers. Before even computers. Before, it's like he's doing everything by hand and filing it and doing.
It's a masterpiece.
What that man dedicated his life to. He and Judy were just.
And I think he interviewed so many people. Like he interviewed so many people in that story there, Goodworth and...
So it's
So your relationship, David asked you to edit?
well, anything I could help him with, which was I was also working 3 full-time jobs. That's another whole story.
You edited the chapter on Sheffield.
No, that I wrote.
You wrote that chapter?
Because he was running behind, and they were getting frustrated with them. Yeah, so he said, "Will you just please write this?" And so
And
I
this was
did.
with Mrs. Grunfeld
Yes, yes.
and the whole story with Rabbi Schoenfeld.
Right, and then I ended up writing a play with it with another friend of mine, and we performed it at Yeshiva of Brooklyn. It's been performed many times. It was a very...
Would you regard David Krenzer as one of the greats of Jewish historians?
Had it not been for him, our entire knowledge of and perspective of what happened during the Holocaust would not exist. He took tremendous. They really beat up on him. They really called him a liar. He said, no, it was, and he's such a fine man. Such a fine
His book, Our Brother's Blood and To Save the World, I mean, these are masterpieces.
Right.
These are the gold standard books.
For him to have even acquired that information, he traveled the world interviewing people.
And he donated his library and his tapes.
Well, he ended up charging something, but they, for a long time, his son was one of his sons, oldest son, was head of admissions at Yeshiva University for 30 years. Anyway, so for a while he kept stuff in their library. But I guess I don't want to name a particular organization. But somehow all that some of these huge organizations publish isn't the full story.
Yeah.
They're political.
I agree with you. He was honest and professional, and his work is just
driven. If you've been there, if you've lived through that, if you've seen all, how can you not?
So Shari, also Rabbi Weissman.
Yes.
He's
So
one of
huge. When he got on that train, and what he had gone through for the year that Hungary had been under the German control, but when they were on the train, his wife and children were on that train, and he said to her, "I've got to try and escape. The world needs to know what's happening." And she said, "Yes, you do." And he climbed through a window and took a chance. He survived the jump. He survived the shooting. He ended up making it to wherever he needed to make it to be. But he was huge. But he was a broken man. They were all broken. You couldn't...
He was very close with Gissi Fleischman. And they saved so many Jews from Slovakia,
Yes.
And he's one of the greats, really.
He was.
He eventually came to America.
So my point is,
Did David have a
Dr.
connection with him?
had the person more than anyone. And
unfortunately, Rabbi Weissmandel in many Holocaust museums isn't even mentioned. He's not even mentioned, which is...
Again, so much of it is there's a lot.
There's misinformation.
Oh, and we're not even talking about Mike Tress, what all he did. So David Kranzler's the one who wrote all of that on Mike Tress. So it's he's the one who...
Can I ask, when you were in Brooklyn?
Yes.
Do you remember any of the Rabbanim, any of the...
So I had this thing. Gotta remember, I'm this hick kid from Memphis, but I had my bubby. It was the whole... So anytime there was any Hasidic thing for Hanukkah, I would take my kids and go. I would be the only, one there who didn't speak Yiddish, but I didn't care. I was drawn to all of it. Yeah, I loved going to, plus I taught in Borough Park. I taught everywhere.
Where did you teach in Borough Park?
Rabbi Balcony had a school in 14th Avenue or something. So, yeah, I taught for several years, and I taught at all the top schools. It was because since I had that secular background, I could teach the regions. I taught 9th grade global, 10th grade global, 11th grade American, 12th grade American, economics, anything, any of the secular region courses I could teach. So they were happy to have me. And anyway.
And Shari, your connection with Israel?
So after that first flight, this is a little funny, I had never been anywhere. So we'd gone to Auschwitz, blown away. We had come to Eretz Yisrael, and this was in 1984. It was my first time anywhere. But I was just, I realized what Israel was to all of those people that had managed to escape from Europe. What it took them to get there, walking over the mountains and under the whatever. It was hard enough for my grandmother, when it wasn't the Holocaust, to make it out, what it was for them. So I had a real affinity, you know. But so anyway.
Your connection with this country, with Israel and Jerusalem.
Thank you. So as our plane is taking off to leave Eretz Yisrael, to go back to New Jersey, and I'm sitting on the window, left side of the plane, and I'm watching as the shoreline is getting further and further away, and I couldn't breathe. I started like hyperventilating. I just couldn't breathe. So my sister said, "Is there a doctor on board?" So about 20 guys got up and came back. And my sister said, "Well, who went to Harvard?" So these guys started, and they get up, but a few of them. Well, I was so appalled at what she did. It took my attention off, and I started laughing. So then I started breathing again. But from that time on, my heart was here. So whenever I could get a chance, I came back.
And now you're living in the old city, in the
so like when I first came back, I stayed. There was a Soloveitchik family that had a free apartment that one of my sons was close to it anyway. So I'm staying in Geula with the Soloveitchik. It just doesn't get better. It just does. Oh, anyway, it's just that the whole nother. Really been an extraordinary.
And you knew Rabbi Bullman as well?
The Rabbi Bullman, yes. So my husband was from Virginia, and Rabbi Bullman had been his Rebbe for a while. The Rabbi Bullman also, and you had, who's the guy from Feldman, Rabbi Feldman from Atlanta. You had a few key people, maybe 5, and also Gershon Kranzler, whatever that magazine was that they published. Maybe that was before Beryl Wine's time, I believe. But I remember when Rabbi Feldman came to Memphis, he spoke periodically, and they had just come out with Parv cheese. He said, "There is no such thing as Parv cheese. It's strange. You cannot put Parv cheese on a hamburger." I guess times have changed a little bit.
What's amazing, walking with you today in the old city, you know so many people here.
Well, that's because I was here during COVID. When I had the chus to be locked in, when everybody else was locked out, they did not allow, and you had to show your residence card. There were times when I was the only human being at the hotel, or the only human being down in the tunnels, and they did tremendous excavations during COVID. They dug up that entire plaza, and they found the hotel stones. There's another 16 straight down. They sunk these massive columns, and that whole new road, that whole new plaza they put back, it's not on anything, it's on columns. It's all on steel columns. And they've dug all, everybody must, you could spend, what they've uncovered is just incredible.
It's amazing.
Amazing.
Now, another amazing story is with your hearing. This is a
So
miracle.
I must to finish the hearing story. So one of my trips to Israel, I'm trying to think which year this might have been, maybe 1965. And no, 2011, 2010, maybe 2011, 2010, something like that, when they came out with, so if I had been in Borough Park, you can't use any German products. Nothing. And the whole hearing aid thing is I don't want to call it a scam, but it's terrible what they charge. Anyway, but when I came to Israel, they do use German products because Germany had, so
the reparations.
So, right. So they were top in the technology, and they had devised a hearing aid that had computerized parts where if you couldn't, before all hearing aids did was amplify the noise, so that didn't increase your discernment. Like it might alert you if somebody's, getting ready to run you over or something, but it didn't tell you anything you needed to hear. So anyway, so I went to this place, and I actually bought a pair of hearing aids. They tested my hearing. They gave me these hearing aids, and when I said it was on Hillel Street, and when I was sitting there, when they first put them in, and they only turned it up a little bit, I screamed. I thought a bomb went off. It was a motorcycle had gone by, so it was going to take me a while to get used to the sounds. But after a couple of weeks, when I went back for a checkup and they had turned it up, I could hear. So this year, it's still like totally deaf, but somehow, subconsciously, it gives me direction. Like if it's coming from over there, I'll turn. I don't really know that I hear it, but I'll do it. But anyway, I realized, I sat down on a bench and I just started sobbing because I realized, I thought for all those years I had a handicap, but I realized it was really a bracha, because if I hadn't lost my hearing, I would have totally integrated into Memphis Gentile society like the vast majority of people in Memphis did. Even those that came from families. The Baron Hirsch, which was the frumest shul in the world, if you didn't pay your dues they sat there with a table, you had to write out a check and sign it on Yom Kippur if you wanted your seat. But that was the level, but they wanted more and they grew. But I realized that what I thought had been a handicap, sometimes it takes you 60 years to realize that what Hashem sent to you was a bracha. And now I am eternally grateful because I can both hear, and I had all of the, it's frustrating for my kid. And for a lot, I'm always, what? Like when we first moved to Brooklyn. Anyway, it's just...
Can I ask you?
Yes.
When you had your hearing aid and you could hear your children speak, that must have been...
I'll tell you something crazier.
Amazing experience.
I'll tell you something even crazier. A few weeks ago, I was at Rabbi Mati Berger's house. His wife, Bela, is an extraordinary lady. He's also always busy in Asia, a lot of times for Shalashudas, so she'll have some women come over. And I just got the latest hearing aids. By the way, would you believe, I think they've come out with AI hearing aids that, like you're speaking to me, instead of me hearing you more clearly, it actually says you perfectly. And somebody said they're even coming out with AI hearing aids that if you speak in Hebrew, it'll translate it for me. That's what I'm waiting for. But anyway, so I was there, and she has ladies over, and we sing for Shalashudas. So I've got my new hearing aids in, and we open, and so I've heard sort of what my kids would always sing, Samiras by the Shabbat or whatever, and I started following along and singing. And then it occurred to me, I was hearing my own voice. I started crying and melting, But, so that's kind of new. I don't feel like I need to yell, or I don't feel like I need to. I'm not sure if it's my voice. I don't know how much AI is. I have I have a very unusual voice because of the way I always heard people speak. Like one time, it used to be you had to call long-distance operators. So I called a long-distance operator to make a call. She said, "Is this Shari Schwartz? I went to school with you." I said, "Oh, man." She said, "I recognize your voice." I felt like I should have done cartoons or something, you know.
But Shari, I have to ask you, when you heard your children speak, I mean, this is the first time that you
could hear them. What I heard of them speaking, and I'm looking at their face, I could put together. But whether I heard their voice, whether that was their real voice or not their real voice, I don't really know.
When you heard their real voice?
Oh, see, they make a joke. They say, "Ma, you heard just fine. You heard when we were talking about it. We were..." I mean, I could hear to a degree when I focused. It's either this word or that word, or it's, you know. But there were a lot of times when I was out in the real world where I blew it, where I didn't respond appropriately, or I didn't, you know. Or,
that's understandable. It's understandable.
I tell you one thing about the technology. I saw a guy on a train in Israel, and he had an iPhone, and he's signing on the iPhone, and the other person is signing back. I know, and they're laughing and having a whole the technology is just extraordinary. But I could hear. I never needed to learn how to sign.
You didn't learn sign?
I couldn't. I could.
Can you do sign language?
No, I never. And a cochlear wouldn't work for me either, because I've learned how my mind can pick up. You know, it's good enough.
It's amazing.
It's amazing.
So Shari, you are so positive, and I'd like to ask you.
Well, what's not to be positive about?
Okay, first of all, we just heard what happened in New York with the elections and what's going on.
You want to go there?
No, but what is your message? Because the world at the moment, it seems so upside down, and who would have believed that we would be having...
I'm going to tell you something that happened to me. This Erev Yontif, I was going to really try to be good. That everything that happens, I have a thing I read from the Tosha Rebbe every day, and Rabbi Miller, and you know, I have that on my, because he lives right around the corner from us. Yes. You know, so I have his, and I taught his granddaughters in school. I knew, you know, they lived just around the block. That, Brooklyn, that was the glory of the Jewish world at that time when I was there. But anyway, what was I going to say again?
Something incredible happened.
So I was determined that I have, no matter what happens during Elul, every single thing is Yad Hashem, and everything is good. There's not a reason for me to be nervous, upset, sad, angry, anything about it. I'm in Eretz Yisrael, my feet work, you know, everything else works good enough at my age. So I got up Shabbos morning, and I'm walking to the hotel, and I was looking, and I usually go down, and anyway, I bumped into some girl who was I wasn't watching where I was going. I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you know, I banged into the back of her head, and she said, "No, it's okay." Anyway, when I got to where I was davening, I realized my hearing aid was gone. I said, "It must have fallen out." I said, "But that's all min hashamayim. I'm not going to get upset." And I davened a perfect, nice davening, you know. But as I'm walking back, I go back to that spot, and I looked all over, and it wasn't there. I said, "Oh, man." So I said, "Okay," and I got back to my apartment, searched my whole apartment, it's not there. I said, "Okay, it's min hashamayim, it's all good, and I'm not going to let it ruin my Shabbos." And I didn't. I went up. Fortunately, it was in my bad ear, so I still had my good ear, so I could function. But when Shabbos was over, I said, "I'll post notes, I'll do whatever I can do." And I pulled back the covers to go to bed, and there was my hearing aid. I had fallen asleep with it and forgotten to take it out. And I said, "Hashem, I passed my test." That was a little test for me, and I presumed it was all for the good. So that's my new mantra that I'm sort of trying to live up to. That every little thing that happens, even if it takes 50, 60 years, even if you never end up finding out, it's all good, and it's all min hashamayim. Especially, you're in a different realm here in the old city. Everybody, we all talk about it all the time, every day. It's just, I lost my credit card. I was going nuts. I lost my credit card. So there's this one place I stop in every day to get where they mix all the vegetables and stuff. I get a little drink. It's 11 shekels every day. How you guys doing? So I walked in. I said, oh, you'll have to forgive me. I'm paying you in shekels because I don't know where my credit card. The one guy, the timing, he said, oh, is this yours? It just, Nisim. Although you just, yeah, right. Thank you, Hashem. It just, it's a different world here. And people, I saw a tour guide one time. He had a group of maybe about 30, 40, looked like young college kids. And he was taking them in the Hoover Square. He had left the hotel. He says, okay, guys, and I'm walking past. He said, how many of you were underwhelmed by the hotel? They all started laughing and raised their hands. Like, what's the big deal? And I thought, oh my goodness. Like, there's so many people that come to Eretz Yisrael, come to the hotel, they miss it. There's a saying around the hotel that anybody who comes to Eretz Yisrael is a special, special schus. That anybody who ends up in the Rova, you're handpicked. And I see that about everybody else. People that have been here for 40 years. As much as I've spoken today, I could tell you people, in my life, I've never met such people as the people who live here. And their life stories, mine is boring compared to theirs.
Yours is incredible beyond belief. And it's been such a honor to be here today.
Well, sir, I think thank you for being interested. Be well. Hatzlacha, and may you continue the incredible work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Shari.
Yes, this is definitely where I belong.
Okay. So, Shari, I am so grateful to you. There are no words enough to express my appreciation. You are somebody, I don't know, an example we should all strive to emulate. You really are amazing. You've gone through, you've witnessed so much in your life, and you're so positive. And like you said, this is where you belong. And people should take your message, and you really are somebody that inspires.
Thank you very much.
And your positivity, it beams through. It's wonderful.
I must tell you, I really must tell you, every year this has it. Their life stories, what they were exposed to, what they were raised with. You see it here. You see every single year is gold. It's a different. There was a lady who, when she was she's in her 70s or 80s now, she had a kidney transplant when she was only, I think, 2 years old. She needed one. So they went to Rav Moshe and said, what do we do? He said, well, has it been done successfully? He said, yes, they've done 5 times. And he said, well, was it ever done on a Jew? He said, we don't know. He said, find out, because a Jew is a different creation. And it turned out a Jew had one, and it was successful on this woman. But that concept, if you see any Jew, you should not denigrate him in any way, shape, or form. I was on a bus, and there was this big bus driver. He for sure had been in the army. He was a big guy, maybe in his 60s, and I was sitting a first row back. So he pulled up on Karen Hayesod, and there was a bag lady there, on drugs, scrawny, and she was trying to get on the bus, and she fell down in the gutter. And people were stepping over her to get on. The bus driver turned. This guy, not a from bone in his body. He looks, he shoved the bus into park. He got out, told everybody to get away. He stepped out of the bus. He picked the woman up and put her on the bench. And then he got back in the bus. That man, in my eyes, is gold. And you see that kind of stuff all the time. People who when I went to my first Ulpan class, there was a lady, and she had on pants, but she wasn't dressed inappropriate, and somebody asked her, said, are you religious? She said, oh no, and she chuckled. She said, I keep Shabbos kosher, and mikveh. But I'm not religious. And you just see everybody here has such, there's a heart, there's I don't think I've met a bad person. And if they're angry, it's because they're hurt. Anyway. So
well, thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom and Chodesh Tov, and I'm so grateful.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.